And happy days to everybody here today on our BIP Chat. And whether you're listening through one of your podcast channels or you're watching us back on YouTube, or indeed you might be watching us live on LinkedIn and Facebook. This is Thomas and Penny Power and BIP Chat. So what is BIP Chat all about? BIP stands for Business is Personal. And if you're watching this as a video, you will see that I'm holding up my book, Business is Personal. And this was something that a philosophy in life and business that Thomas and I really have, which is all about the fact that business is personal. And every one of us who works in it truly can feel that, although the mantra used to be, it's not personal, Penny, it's just business. And we don't believe in that. So what we do on this BIP Chat is we gather incredible experts that we've got to know very well because we've invited them in to become part of our BIP100 membership in our community. And these experts are chosen not only for their life experiences and their business experiences, but very deeply for their values and their passion and their commitment to their subject. And we feel if we bring these people to you, you might gain some fantastic insights and knowledge, or you might even look them up on LinkedIn and think, actually, I might connect with this person, they could help me. And that will make us very, very happy. So today we are talking about how do you create a business strategy when there is global change. And we're coming to you in October 2021. And change is very relevant now. But I think even if you listen to this back in 5 years, we will all still agree that we're all going through constant change. I think change is now it's permanent. It's the new norm, isn't it? So today our guests are Kate Faragher and Steve Sanders. And our key guests, because the way we structure this is we have somebody who comes with the primary topic, which, as we've shared with you, is about business strategy when there's global change. And then they invite a guest. Very happy that Kate invited Steve Sanders to us, and she's going to introduce Steve to you in a minute and explain why she's invited Steve along. But why did we want to talk to Kate? Well, we've known Kate very well. She's just a phenomenal powerhouse of information. She's run some webinars for us on having quality conversations. She facilitates incredible conversations inside corporates, government, in these political spheres, and is also a trainer and facilitator. And I suppose, Kate, how would you sum up your mission in life around your incredible core skills around communication?
Well, what I really love to do is try to create a safe space so that things can emerge and we can propel positive change. So for me, what I like to do is a safe space for learning, a safe place for strategy, a safe place for future thinking. That's what I want to create.
Yeah, and we've witnessed that because we've had you run a sort of a safe space for us around collaboration and helping people to understand collaboration and how to respect each other in a collaborative environment. So, and you are the owner of Bespoke Skills. Mm-hmm. So tell us a bit about just at the top of this show, what you do, what your business is and how you're helping people.
So I'm a communications expert. I have been for 20 years across sort of 4 different sectors and throughout the world, basically Africa, Europe and the Americas. And what I do with Bespoke Skills is I got a bit fed up because I was doing lots of training in usually corporate environments, if I'm honest, and they always wanted off-the-shelf training, and I didn't feel as if it was making the long-term change and impact. And impact's really important to me, that I wanted. So I felt as if I could bespoke some training and bespoke some groups of discussion, then we would deepen the learning and have it last for longer. So Bespoke Skills was born out of wanting to really create a learning environment that propelled a new way of being, like to shine the light on blind spots and for us to feel confident to really go into those uncomfortable spaces where learning exists.
Awesome, brilliant.
That's lovely. And it is, that's really good, that, Kate.
It's very exciting. And as I say, I've sort of experienced that. And I think of myself as quite a good communicator. And then it was quite interesting learning a lot from you on the webinar that you helped us to run. So now you've invited the wonderful Steve Sanders along. Please tell us why you've invited Steve and why this is relevant to this topic, which I will repeat again, is about creating a business strategy when there is global change. Tell us about Steve before Steve then tells us about himself.
So one of the reasons I wanted Steve to come with me today is because I approach, I haven't got an MBA or anything like that. I hold spaces, you know, in order, as I said, to create this safe space for change. But I wanted to, in a way, challenge my thinking and see, you know, is there anything that I can learn from a more sort of structured and academic approach? I love academia, I love science, I love measurement, I love all that kind of work. And I was thinking, are there blind spots in my thinking? So usually when I have a conversation with someone, what I love is if they think slightly different, if there's a diverse voice or a diverse way of thinking. So I reached out to him, and I have found him just mind-blowingly exciting to discuss things with. He's a guest lecturer and a business ambassador. He thinks really, I think, am I allowed to say that you used to work at Ernst & Young, EY?
Yeah, for a while,
and just the way that he thinks, it stretches me, and I love to work and think with people who stretch my thinking. I know that you're
welcome, Steve.
But I don't know how else you would describe
yourself.
Well,
Steve, so I know you are a go-to-market strategist and this around this subject also as value creation. Do you want to just fill in some of any gaps that we haven't done?
Yeah, I know. I love that. I love compliments. Thanks, crikey. I love the idea of the academic and the structure and all that sort of stuff. Because if anybody's known me for anything, it's being slightly off the wall, actually, and the ability to think very differently about things. This is why over the years I kind of got involved in many of the in big businesses and small medium businesses, stuff that was tangential to their core, which needed a strategic lens. And I thought I'd better get a bit more structured at this, because honestly, you can only go so far by the seat of your pants, which I think a lot of us that are in the hot seat do that. So that's what led me towards a little bit of the academic learning, and I was invited to guest lecture in a Warwick Business School and on strategy to the MBAs and help with PhD stuff sometimes, and it's really interesting because it challenges me. I'm not an academic powerhouse, but it does challenge me. And I think that's part of why I love that this subject area, because while I look at things very practically, there is a good reason to look at things in a structured way, because it helps you not miss stuff. And there's a lot of people that I'm working with that are approaching me, and the lights go on actually, because they're often technical experts. But what by the way, Kate, I love this asking better questions thing. It was very much part of the EY ethos. And I listened to your internal lecture or lessons for us, and I cannot, because I love talking, and don't ask the right questions often enough. But I do think people don't, and they have.
But can I start off with a question then? Because back to basics.
Yeah, let's start from the top here.
So, Kate and Steve, I mean, you might want to give different answers to the same question, but what is strategy?
Well, for me, I think this word is quite often misused, or it doesn't have any meaning anymore. And I think sometimes it's quite good to change it a little bit. So quite a lot of people think of strategy as a plan, a forward plan. But I think it's a little bit more than that. I think of strategy as future thinking. And I think that it means that we need to imagine, a little bit like Einstein did thought experiments. I think that we need to do conversation experiments. Steve, do you want to come in? Do you remember we talked about that thing about the dam? It was something about
the dam? Looking further and wider, and there was I'm not going to get specific because I mean that it's a sensitive subject, but there was a massive disaster in a nuclear power plant not long ago, and the engineers built a sea defense wall high enough, just a bit higher than the highest previous tidal wave. But of course, they didn't plan ahead for an even greater disaster that was unforeseeable and unexpected, and therefore the water went over the top and destroyed the nuclear power plant. Now the lesson in that is that you can confine your thinking to what you already know, and the way you already think about things. But of course, you lose opportunities if you do that. Yeah, you lose risks and threats, but you also lose opportunities. So it is about looking near and far, narrowly on what you know about and what you're comfortable with, and wider as well into the things that you're uncomfortable with, because you need to answer better questions. You need to balance priorities better. You need to make optimal impact. And we'll talk more about impact, right, Kate? Yeah.
No, definitely, without my favorite word.
And,
so if I was to go back on that strategy piece, I think it's about exactly that. Like, how do we future think beyond the limits of what we're currently thinking? So that's what I think of strategy as.
And okay, so it's future thinking, and it's obviously dealing with the Japanese example of not building the wall high enough in terms of setting your expectations too low. But who is strategy most relevant to in an organization or in any kind of institution?
Steve, I'd love your thoughts on that, kind of what is strategy and who's it for, before I come in with that.
I remember about 20 years ago reading a book, What is Strategy and Does It Matter? And it was a required reading in business school, and it obviously does matter, right? But it's what you understand. Listen, people use the word strategy, strategic accounts. I'm a strategic account manager, but you're not. You're just going after big deals. So no wonder people are disillusioned about strategy.
So in that sense, strategic means big.
Yeah, but it's not.
It's
honestly,
not
it could be critical. It could be a key account. It could be a major account. But let's not get bogged down by the use of the word strategy. And I think it's if you're going to be doing something and you're going to be going hell for leather in a line of sight fashion towards what you already think is the right objective, don't you think you should look a little bit differently at it and have checks and balances? And that doesn't just safeguard the one stakeholder in your business; it safeguards all of them. Right, because you've got employees and their families, you've got the community around your company, you've got the environment that you should be serving. You've got all of these other considerations that come in when you just answer 5 simple questions in strategic analysis. So it matters to everybody. Who should be doing it? Well, it depends who you want to take responsibility for leading those questions and those discussions, who you want to gather the information and form it into recommendations, and who you want to benefit and use that information in different ways. But honestly, I think it just needs to happen, right? So it is a
summarize that as, so we're talking about organized future thinking.
Yeah. What came to me is, I remember being taught, we need tactical people, the doers, and you need the strategic people. And I want to see if you can confront me about that, because I'm
very
not saying
1980s.
It is very, and I still apply that to myself. I sometimes think, am I in tactical mode or am I in strategic mode? And as you say, Kate, am I in future thinking mode? And I know, for example, if we've got some leaders here who are managing and some business owners, I remember mentoring a business owner who was constantly in strategy mode and constantly overwhelming their staff who needed to be in tactical mode because they needed to be doing the right now, but they were constantly feeling overwhelmed with what they needed to do in the future. Is that a fair conversation to have?
Absolutely. And I think it's about discipline. So, for example, there's a Walt Disney came up with Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse, but he also came up with Disney World and Disneyland. And that came out of future thinking. It came out of strategic future thinking. And the way that they did it is that they had one room where they would dream, the thought experiment, the dialogic experiment, where they had no limits. They would just dream and think, what is it that we could do with Minnie and Mickey Mouse from this animation? And then they went into another room, a physical other room, and then they thought about how can we, is this realistic? And they looked at it from a practical point of view. And then they looked at it in another room from a critical point of view, like a critic, like where's this wrong? Where's this good? Where's this bad? Right. So there's different ways, I think, to think about it, and they require different parts of our brain.
Yeah.
If I want to answer the question, which is, who is this for? Yeah. Right. I think actually it's exactly what Steve was saying, is that it is for who is required to help stretch the thinking. So for example, in the political sphere, we are dealing with, well, actually in the world sphere, we're dealing with climate change. We've got COP26 coming out to my hometown in Glasgow and in just a couple of weeks. And what they did was that 6 select committees came together and they put together a citizens' assembly, right? And that was, they went out to a whole host of diverse voices, some of which had never heard of climate change in their life before. And they said, what do you think we should do, and come up with recommendations. That report is now being used in Parliament to hold government to account to do some more work. So who needs to get involved? I would say there are 2 places that it needs to get involved. The leaders need to be involved in it, and the people on the ground need to be involved in it. And this is why, where before leaders would be, I remember reading a leadership book, and they said a leader is somebody who climbs, where all the people are working in the field, the leader and the managers are the people dealing with the people on the ground. The leader climbs the ladder, looks over and says, this is the way to go. Well, actually, leadership now in a time of global change needs to be listening to the people on the ground, saying, what do you hear? What do you see? Which way do we think we are going? What are we missing? And leaders need to get to that place where they can say, I don't know, I don't understand, I've got it wrong, we need to change. And I think that the people that we need to be speaking to are the people on the ground, so that we can have champions all through the business that can, so that the people at the top of the organization can lead more effectively, knowing they've got that democratic voice. But I do work a lot in politics, so that democratic voice is quite important to me.
So using your example of Disney and his dream and critical and assessment techniques, that's 100 years old. Strategy now, how is strategy different now to back then with Walt Disney? Is it any different?
Well, in that Walt Disney probably only had a few people in that room, a few experts in that room. I think we have to stretch the net a bit wider, so that we're engaging much more people so that we've got more diverse voices. And actually, we need to get more people in the margins. So for example, in climate change, we need to strengthen the voice of people in the Marshall Islands, in different places that are at the forefront of climate change. We need to be able to hear those voices so we understand how to lead. And that's what's different now. The other difference is the timing of change. We have had to shift with the whole COVID pandemic, we've had to shift on a dime to try and get new vaccines, new behavioral change, and we need to be able to shift on a dime. And I think that the way that we do that, we need to really think cleverly about how we can deal with changes that are happening, in a very short space of time. And behavioral change and nudge theory can work, but we need to be able to be thinking more future thinking, exploring, having more dialogue, getting people together to think, what is it that we need to be thinking about in order to stretch our answers here.
So, Kate, I love the Disney example. Sorry, Thomas. Because I was speaking to James Knight recently. He brought up I'm the founder of I'm, and he mentioned that there were different people in his immediate circle that had different ways about them, different perspectives on the world, different vantage points. And he was a person that was cycling ideas rapidly and highly creative, but he needed somebody to organize and be deliberate and direct and control. And he needed somebody who was detail oriented and numbers, figures, and etc. And then he needed somebody that would care about the people that were there and would, so balancing the right people in the right roles is quite important. But what I just wanted to touch on something about stretching the thinking is there'll be people listening to this and their antibodies kick in when we talk about strategy is about going, wow, what's this and the big blossoming future and everything like that. Often it's about optimizing thinking. And the impact that you choose to make can change from time to time. But the only way to really make sure that you're first of all, only telling the people who are your tactical doers, and yes, there are people that you want to be tactical doers, but no human being wants to think they're using their life and their time, especially millennials and generations Z, They want to know that they have a degree of confidence in what they're being asked to do, that there's a purpose behind it, sometimes a greater purpose. And that demands that we're asking different questions about what is the global impact of this business? What could the global impact be? The holistic purpose and impact of this business. So maybe these questions come in, but they all come.
So it's not just about numbers and performance then, because most companies are just about numbers and results and performance.
But it's about deciding what impact that can be made, but based on some fundamental questions. If you allow it to go off on a tangent based on creative thinking, then you're going to be contemplating your navel constantly, day after day, week after week, and you are going to have people feeling confused and misguided. Whereas if you keep this in a relatively controlled way, asking seriously relevant questions, but having people around you that allow you to open your mind. So you can't do this if you keep a linear focus on what you were doing anyway. I'm thinking, how do I get there faster?
I wanted to ask about that, because when we're looking at, is Thomas's question, is it different now? Is I imagine one of the big challenges that leaders have is that the democratization of everything. Because when people could be autocrats, just say, follow this strategy because I've told you, very, very different to now. And I remember reading a book, and we had him as a speaker on Academy, from Leonardo Herrera, who he did a book called Viral Change. And he wrote about the fact that change has to happen like a virus inside an organization. You find the people most susceptible to that virus and get them to create the change. When you're leaders. So is that one of the big challenges now, is that leaders cannot be autocratic?
Sorry, what you said before about the autocratic, what was your example there? Because I had
Well, I didn't give an example of an autocrat.
Well, I can give you one, Alan Sugar.
Alan Sugar, that Thomas
we just did whatever we were told.
Yeah. And
so this whole idea of this is the way, and that approach, it had its place, but I think it needs to change. I think it's what I was saying before. But I do think that we need to think about how the leaders lead. So I think
what confuses me is if you have more people involved, more democratization, terrible word that is. If you have more people involved, bigger groups, and it's more democratic for people to put their point of view over, how can you shift to a faster speed on future thinking with more voices? Surely you want fewer voices if you want to move faster.
So I think there's a few things there that it triggered something, a story that somebody told me about a local council during COVID, and they said that they were more efficient during COVID than they'd ever been before. And it was because they had taken on an autocratic kind of position, because nobody was around to have the democratic voices to, and they just got on with it. But actually it doesn't lead to a richness of outcome, and you need the richness of the outcome. I truly believe, like, if you look back to the indigenous people used to, if there was a real big problem, they would sit around for 2 weeks sometimes, dialoguing it out, having a conversation about it until they decided on a solution together. Now, we don't take time to have conversations anymore. And I think we need to be able to find those spaces where larger groups do come together to find some of the longer term problems. So the Citizens Assembly, for example, are a large group of people that came together to really explore what they thought should happen for climate change. It doesn't necessarily do things quickly in the short term, but if you have that running at the same time that you're making decisions, it means that it can feed in, and those diverse voices can have better outcomes that have more impact in the longer term, I believe.
So when you take a real example like COP26, which happens end of this month, early part of next month, how will you measure the success of their future thinking or their strategy at the end of I think they're together for 2 weeks, aren't they? How will they know, how will we know whether they've done a good job on, I don't know, the climate plan for everyone at work and the climate plan for everyone at home? How will we know that they've done a good strategic job?
So as opposed to a policy, they might have stated very impressive policies, but do they have a strategy to achieve impact?
Yeah, because people want a climate plan at home and a climate plan at work, and I don't think they have one. So it's very hard to do things if you don't know what you should do. Whereas COVID was wear a mask, get a jab.
See, that word impact, which I know is a really important word to you, Steve. You know, I've heard you use it a lot today and also in the past. Is that the cornerstone? Is that the core of strategy?
I'd like to remind people. Sorry, Kate, Stephanie. I'd like to remind people of the fact that if you create a feature in your product, it needs to enable somebody to have an impact with that feature. Yeah. That's where the benefit exists. So why not use the word impact?
Yeah.
And so when you're describing a feature, rather describe the impact that the person can have when they're using that feature. And now if you are, and I'm not in a position to comment or qualify what is in place or what isn't in place around COP26 in order to keep checks and balances on the effectiveness of how they go about it. But what I would suggest is that needs to be a structure within which they challenge the appropriate questions. Yes. And usually that is, and it's in the dilemma that politicians face, is that it needs to look good in the top left-hand corner of the Daily Mail, otherwise they don't get voted in next time.
Yeah, it's a big
so actually the sound bites can distract from the need for some serious and sometimes questions that need contemplating and need proper self-reflection and maybe admission of shortcomings.
Kate. Kate.
So in this beautiful, what Steve has just said is if anyone is into Otto Scharmer's U theory, there's a whole way of thinking about the framework for strategy going forward coming from conversation, which is obviously my passion because I'm a communications consultant. And part of that strategy is that you listen, but you listen really deeply. And then you sort of, and that's called co-initiate. And then you listen as a group, right? And it can be quite a large group, but you listen as a group. But then there has to be a moment of self-reflection. There has to be a moment of stillness, and there has to be a moment of contemplation. And that's where you go in and you think, what feels right? What is right to do? And this is the bit that we feel as if we need to do, but we actually need to check in with ourselves whether this is the right way to move forward. And I think sometimes we go straight from conversation straight to react. And often that's built into the media's expectation. You know, I also feel for these tennis players who do the game, they've just lost or they've just won, and they get a microphone put onto them. Sometimes we need time to reflect and contemplate in order to move to the next part of the U, Otto Scharmer's U theory, which is much more about co-creation and much more about, right, this is what we do. Let's create a prototype. Let's try it out. And allow ourselves the opportunity to fail, opportunity to say we got it wrong, but let's set out a prototype and then see and then run with it. Sometimes we do too much talking and not enough trying out. And the one thing that I've learned from being in the creative arts was that sometimes you've just got to not talk about it, just do it and see if it works. And then if it doesn't work, chuck it away and then try something else.
What's coming through for me there is we have become incredibly impatient. We want that instant gratification of we're moving forward, we're innovating, we're getting answers, we're moving forward, we're hungry for it all the time. You know, we expect the next iPhone out in 6 months now, and it's this constant thirst which isn't giving anybody time to really reflect on impact, as you say, and are we on it. So where does the subject of innovation sit within strategy? And how do we enable that innovative conversation and innovation to happen?
For me, it's about how we go about the strategy. It's about how we do it. And I think there's loads of ways that you can do it. There's loads of sort of innovation vehicles that you can use. Yeah. And it's about finding the right one for the right circumstance. You know, it might be about engagement, like the citizens' assemblies. It might be really practical things, like if you're working in, I heard about this one the other week, where there was a group of social workers that decided to get some children because there was a safeguarding issue. I can't remember the exact details, but they decided to get children in on the recruitment panels, so they would recruit for the people that they wanted. You know, it's sometimes really small things, but they're just really clever about changing the way that we think, changing. And in the Presencing Institute, they talk about every facilitation you have, if it's about climate, but I would say maybe in all circumstances, they think, imagine at this table, and imagine this in boards and financial boards and the C-suite. Imagine today we have the children of the future at this table. We need to put everything that we talk about today through the filter of those children. And also at this table, we need to imagine the future Earth. If we have the Earth's good intention at this meeting, let's put everything through the filter of those two things and keep on referring back to it, so they're very present participants in the conversation. Then that actual act of doing that is quite innovative. So sometimes it's small.
How you have the conversation is the innovation.
For me, I don't know, I'm sure Steve's got a different.
How you organise and facilitate the conversation is the innovation.
That's, for me, it is, yeah.
Yeah, I see that.
Well, I think, yeah, you know, there's an opportunity for us to imagine that we've got largely the right ideas already, and that we kind of know our market, and we know what they need, and there's nobody out there loud enough or powerful enough to shout out and change our course, because if we make it and sell it, then enough people will buy it. But I do think that we're reaching a point when two incredibly important forces are going to exert themselves on organizations.
What are those two?
People deciding where they want to work, and the best people therefore deciding where they want to work, which is really critical, and people deciding who they want to buy from, or what public spending programs they want to support, therefore what politicians they want to support. And one of the fundamentals, let's say pick a fundamental question of strategic decision making. I mean, should we go it alone, or should we work with somebody? Can you hear me?
I missed that.
Should we go it alone, or should we buddy up with somebody, as an example?
Yeah.
Now, if you treat the world as though you already know what's out there and you can do it best, and you don't really care what other people think is out there, you're just going to keep going. You haven't stopped for a moment to consult other people and ask them, is there somebody out there who's doing it better than me? Or maybe does the majority of customers think it should just stay the way it is now, right? And so do I have sufficient differentiation in my approach to achieve this alone, or should I be combining programs of government public sector delivery or product proposition ideas? So these things only come out of the woods if you consult people. But if you just throw your strategy open for other people to shape it for you, then you're in chaos, right? So you have to confine these discussions and these deliberations.
So can I ask you a question, Steve, on this? So when you're working with, and I know you work at senior level, C-suite people, large organizations, and as you say, owner-managed businesses, how often when you're going into a situation are they asking you to support them, looking at their go-to-market strategies and things like that, based on fear and wanting to disrupt? So one is, I feel like the market's chasing me and I'm scared and I've got to do something, or actually I want to be a disruptor. When you're talking to people,
I'm struck usually by the speed with which people change that perspective when they're talking to, because they usually start, either they're masking their fear or whatever, or the reality. They usually start with a quite high degree of confidence that they've got it right, and that all they need to do is decide how to reach the market and how to sell to more people.
Right.
But the questions that I pose to them makes them realize actually that they, in the first place, might be doing something that needs to change.
Right.
Because they haven't really considered the places in their market or in the value chain that are vulnerable enough to create a gravitational pull for what they're offering, right? Yeah, if you like. Yeah, so there's got to be a vulnerability somewhere that's going to go, oh my goodness, look at what's there, and drag it forward to mainstream success. So that when they start thinking about these questions, And that is about differentiation, if you think about it, right? So where do I differentiate? How do I differentiate? And they suddenly start to realize, actually, this is not just a question of getting somebody to help me put the pedal further down and fuel inject what I've got. They really need to think about how this fits into the ecosystem. And they need to think about the changing patterns of what consumers think and feel about things. And if they're not also, as Kate would have touched on, and we'll probably want to touch on now, the broader purpose that we're all here for in this burgeoning generation of buying influence, let's put it that way, the Generation Z and millennials that will dominate the market demand forces very soon. Buying power, decision power, the most desirable employees, they will dominate who succeeds, right? And pretty soon there will be alternatives who are doing it better than you, right?
Yeah.
That's for
so,
sure.
You know, and it's not going to be your measure of whether they're doing it better than you or not, because you think you've got the best tech or the best program idea.
No, absolutely.
It's going to be the consumer and the employee that decides, right?
Yeah.
So you better start asking and listening.
Kate, we were going to
say
say
right lens.
about that.
Pretty amazing. So I mean, the way that I like to think about it is that we're going from an ecosystem to an ecosystem, and that we're really thinking about the ecology of our mind and the ecology of organizations. I studied ecology, so I'm sort of fascinated by the complexity of what ecology brings, and I like this idea of ecology of the mind, because we often have the competing people inside us that we're navigating. But I think what was also beautiful about what Steve says is this idea of, yes, sometimes we can talk about the economic impact, but we also have to think about the social impact and also the emotional impact that people are having as well. And I think the social impact is going to have more and more importance as we're holding spaces for these new leaders that they've got to think about. So I just wanted to pick up on that point.
I do love that phrase, holding spaces.
Oh yeah, it is a beautiful phrase.
It's such a lovely name for a company.
Do it so well.
What I do find fascinating, I don't want to go too far from the subject, but it is about strategy, is that when I observe my 3 kids in their 20s now as consumers and business people themselves, they assume every problem is solvable, and they go online and they will find disruptors who have done exactly what you said at the top of the show, Steve. They didn't just put the wall that high. They thought about, does it need to be a wall? Can it be something different? And, you know, an example without going on, you know, Hannah just sent us a video this morning of this new box that arrived, and she said she's got a very fussy puppy, and apparently it's a cross poodle with another dog. Apparently they're known to be very fussy eaters. And there's a company, you go online and you tell them exactly what your puppy's like, and in came a box with bespoke food, and it had Dr. Bailey, which is the name of her dog, all branded on it. And it's a complete £20 a month subscription package. And she said, well, I knew there'd be somebody who would do that, Mum.
You just had to find
Whereas I would have gone to the supermarket and kept trying different solutions. And so what I am very aware of is that we have now got a generation coming through who if there isn't that solution, they'll create it because they'll see the gap.
And one other critical issue is that the middle class power base of developed economies is the minority on our planet, and they've had an undeserved control over what succeeds and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Based on the fact that the pain is conceptual somewhere else, and it doesn't visit them at their front doors. Well, 2 things: the pain is going to start visiting people on their front doors, and this generation of the burgeoning generation of demand and decision makers, and the supply, choking out the supply of good employees because they want to work for companies that do it right. Yeah, and the other factor, of course, is that middle-class people from developed economies are not going to be making all the decisions moving forward. Yeah. It is, societies around the world are developing, their disposable income is increasing, their power in the supply chain and value chain is increasing, and therefore we will reach a tipping point, a tipping point when takes some people by surprise, and other people think, yeah, knew that was coming.
Yeah.
God, it's happened, you know.
Yeah.
So still the question remains for me is, how do you have more people in? How do you go faster? How do you have this agile strategy? How can you do all of that faster with more people? I still think it must be hard to do that. So
Dialogue is the answer.
And does that have to be physical? Is that on Zoom?
Everywhere. Dialogue everywhere. Everyone needs to have conversations. Conversations create change. Stories create change. We have to change the narrative. The narrative is changing already. And so we have to create more dialogue. So there are dialogic circles that are popping up everywhere now. And there
dialogic circles.
Yes.
I like that.
And they're all, we're all coming together, as it were, no matter if we've been doing it on our own for years, or we've looked who's doing this. And the Presencing Institute is kind of holding the space for the world to come and I would imagine there's other people as well, but to create those spaces for dialogue. More and more people.
So, and you talk about this, sorry, Thomas, you talk about we generally have a status quo bias, which I find really interesting. Can you share a bit more about that, Kate?
We like the things the way they are.
Yeah, and so with status quo bias, people find it difficult to make decisions sometimes. So you usually, when you're trying to sell to them, you make it easy for them to make decisions, or you're finding it difficult to balance things up. There's loads of biases that we have, and if we kind of own and understand our biases a little bit more, they are fundamentally, biases are blind spots, and if we can have a space where we have conversations where people can shine a light on those blind spots, not through debate where you go, well, you're wrong because that bit's wrong. It's like, well, what you've made me think about is this, and then you're actually creating a space where 2 ideas, 3, 4, 5, 6 ideas, which are slightly different and sometimes opposing, can come together. But there needs to be Steve's bit as well. There needs to be that practical. I want to come on. You would call it, but yeah,
I want to come on to that with Steve. But just to finish that off, when you're talking about, so we're talking about leaders here who want to feel like they know what they're doing. You hear about imposter syndrome all the time. They're really fearful of that vulnerability of not having all the answers. And in your fantastic workshops and facilitation, how do you help those leaders to feel it's okay to not know and to bring in other thoughts?
That's a good question.
One of my favorite biases is the Dunning-Kruger effect. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is something where if you think that you know everything about a topic, right, you probably don't. So I'm a communication consultant. I've been one for 20 years, and I've always had this thing, but I don't, like, when I got, I'm not an expert. I can't be a BIP. And then I found out about the Dunning-Kruger effect, because if you think you know it all, you probably don't. But if you don't think you know it all, there's a good chance you know quite a lot. And the Dunning-Kruger effect is this belief system that we think that we don't know anything when we start exploring something in more depth.
And that must be from childhood. Because I was always the kid that didn't mind humiliating myself in class and not knowing anything and being the one to put the hand up. And I didn't care the teachers being cross with me, you weren't listening, or, all that. I just had a question. But there are some people that were so humiliated that they've gone into adulthood fearing not looking like they know what they.
Yeah. People become addicted to having the answers.
Yeah,
is and for whatever reason, right? I think that there is a tendency, and Thomas and I talked about this quite a lot a while ago. There's a tendency to think in isolation, to decide what the answer is, and then to preoccupy yourself telling people what your opinion is and what your
there's a lot of that.
All right, and so there's a preoccupied tendency towards that among people, and the more isolated we become, the more you do that, and conversations become, I'm telling you my view. So give you a moment, you tell me yours. Well, I'm going to tell you mine back. And this human instinct of curiosity is actually the most powerful of all instincts. and openness is a strength, right? But what you've got to do is embed that in that dialogue, because otherwise people are going to be listening to this and thinking, that can be just uncontrollable. How am I going to make a decision, right? And the thing is to keep it focused and share the challenge points with people, because there's only 5 or 6 challenge points that you actually need to keep an eye on. But the trigger is you've got to ask better questions when you're doing the sort of thing. You've got to ask those questions in a better way, all right, so that you really are opening up and you're going deeper, right? You're going deeper and wider. So you're saying, I know you're telling me that there's nobody competing with us in this space, but how do we know? What about all of those other variations out there? Where are we going to go to? Keep pushing, right? But keep in that sort of in that conversation, and don't just accept answers that support your own bias.
Yeah, and that is a really good. And that you know, this is the end of the show. Can you believe that's 45 minutes? It's been a fascinating conversation with the two of you, and I hope anybody that's listened through this has really enjoyed it and maybe thought of some things about their own personal development. Please look up Kate Faragher, which is spelled Faragher, on LinkedIn, and get in touch with her, and Steve Sanders, which is spelled just as it sounds. And if you want to further this conversation with them. Honestly, thank you both for such a stimulating conversation.
Very,
fantastic,
very good.
Wasn't it?
Very, very good. And I do like listening to these in the car on Spotify. I have to mention that.
Yeah.
Because we listened to one on Sunday night.
We did.
And it was really brilliant, wasn't it?
It was. It is. It's very good to listen back to these shows. So thank you very much, both of you. Next week, we've got Sam Onigbanjo, who is going to be, well, we're going to be challenging him all about the internet marketing space, because Thomas and I have been in that world, this internet world of communication for 23 years now. We've certainly seen lots of changes. We're going to have a really good conversation about that, and maybe burst some bubbles around how we should be using it. So thank you both very much for your time today.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.